Welcome to Coal After Dark. If this is your first time here, I'm glad you found your way. Tonight, we're slowing things down. So whether you're lying in bed, winding down after a long day, driving through the night, or simply looking for somewhere quiet to escape for a little while, you're in the right place. Over the next hour, you'll hear 3 slow-burn horror stories. Stories about places that shouldn't exist, footsteps that never quite make sense, and moments that begin so ordinarily that you almost forget you're listening to a horror story. Each story was inspired by the kinds of accounts people swear really happened. As always, names and locations have been changed. Whether you believe them is entirely up to you. So dim the lights, get comfortable, maybe check that the doors are locked just in case. This is Coal After Dark. And tonight, our first story begins on a lonely stretch of road known as Blackwood Ridge. Tonight's story was sent to me by someone who asked to remain anonymous. As always, names and locations have been changed. Whether you believe it is entirely up to you. If you'd asked me when I was 16 whether I believed in ghosts, I'd have laughed. Not because I was fearless, because I grew up in a small country town where every abandoned building had a story attached to it. Every stretch of bush was supposedly haunted. Every old farmer had seen something he couldn't explain. You hear enough of those stories growing up. Eventually they all blend together. Most of them were rubbish. At least, that's what I thought back then. It started on a Friday night. The kind of night where the air still held on to the last bit of summer warmth, even after the sun had disappeared. 7 of us had planned to walk out to an abandoned farmhouse everyone called Blackwood Ridge. Someone had started throwing parties there months earlier. Nobody knew who owned it anymore. Nobody really cared. It was far enough from town that no neighbors ever complained, which made it perfect. Jake organized everything. Connor brought a speaker. Brooke complained before we'd even left the car park. "I swear if I ruin these shoes," Jake laughed. "You've been complaining about those shoes since you bought them. They cost me a fortune. They're white." "Exactly." Connor shook his head. "Wear white shoes to a bush party." "Genius," she shoved him. "You're paying for new ones." The rest of us laughed. Normal conversation, normal people, a completely normal night. We left town just after 8. The first part of the walk was easy. Streetlights, bitumen roads, the occasional passing car. Mia walked beside me, replying to messages. Ellie kept checking the weather. Jake was already talking about who would probably be at the party. Everything felt ordinary, comfortably ordinary. The last streetlight sat at the edge of town. Beyond it, the road turned to gravel. Bushland stretched for kilometers. Jake stopped walking for a moment. He looked back towards town, then grinned. "Right," he clapped his hands once. "Everyone here?" Connor looked around dramatically. "Let's see." He pointed around the group. 1, 2, 3. By the time he reached 7, he shrugged. "Unless someone's tagging along?" Brooke rolled her eyes. "You're an idiot." "I know." We laughed, then we kept walking. None of us thought about that conversation again. Not for a very long time. The deeper we walked, the quieter everything became. Not unnaturally quiet, just country quiet. The kind where you suddenly realize how much noise towns actually make. No traffic, no televisions, no distant sirens, just shoes crunching over loose gravel, the occasional breeze, leaves brushing against one another. Connor's speaker finally died. He smacked it twice, nothing. "Typical," Jake shrugged, "probably for the best." Nobody argued. Without music, conversation naturally slowed. People drifted into smaller groups. At one point I realized I couldn't hear anyone talking at all, only footsteps. 7 people walking. 7 different rhythms. Nothing unusual, or so I believed. It must have been another 10 minutes before Brooke slowed down beside me. She glanced over her shoulder, then looked forward again. "You ever get that feeling?" she asked quietly. "That someone's walking behind you?" I smiled. "Only because you just said it." She smiled back, but only for a second. "I've looked back 3 times. And? Nothing." She kicked a loose stone off the road. "Forget it." I did, for about 5 minutes. Then I looked behind us too. The road disappeared into darkness, empty. I felt stupid for even checking. Jake suddenly stopped. "So," he said, "who keeps hanging back?" Connor frowned. "What?" "I keep thinking someone's falling behind." Nobody answered. Jake looked around, counted us quickly, then shrugged. Must have imagined it. We started walking again. Looking back now, I wish one of us had suggested turning around, or going home, or even just waiting a few minutes. Instead, we laughed it off. Because that's what 16-year-olds do. They assume there's always an explanation. Nobody said much after that. Not because anyone was frightened, more because we'd all settled into that quiet rhythm you naturally fall into on a long walk. Jake and Connor drifted to the front. Brooke and Ellie stayed a few meters behind them. Mia walked beside me. Sam wandered between whoever happened to be talking. The road stretched on ahead, lit only by the moon. Every now and then, one of us would use a phone torch to avoid stepping into a pothole. Apart from that, the darkness stayed exactly where it was, beyond the edge of the road, waiting. "You know what I never understood?" Connor said suddenly. "The stories about this place." Jake laughed. "What stories?" "You know." Connor waved vaguely towards the trees. "The haunted farmhouse." "Oh, those." Jake shook his head. "My cousin told me there used to be an old bloke living there who chased kids away with a shotgun." Sam laughed. "See? That's already more believable than ghosts." Brooke nodded. "Every town makes stuff up about abandoned places." Ellie looked toward the trees. "I still wouldn't want to live out here." Connor grinned. "What? You scared?" "No," she answered too quickly. "Just saying." The road narrowed. Tall eucalyptus trees leaned over both sides. The branches almost met above us. The moonlight faded behind the canopy. Connor switched on his torch. The beam bounced across tree trunks. Grey bark, fallen branches, nothing else. "This bit always feels longer," Jake said. "You've walked it before?" I asked. He nodded. "Twice." "And?" He shrugged. "I don't know. It just never feels the same length." Nobody replied. It was a strange thing to say. Not scary, just odd. A cool breeze moved through the trees. For the first time all night, the smell changed. Instead of dry eucalyptus, the air smelled damp, almost earthy, like rain, even though the sky was perfectly clear. Mia noticed it too. "Can you smell that?" I nodded. "Thought it was just me." A few minutes later, Ellie stopped walking. "Hang on." She crouched near the edge of the road. "What?" Brooke asked. Ellie pointed toward the gravel. "There are footprints." We all gathered around. Someone had crossed the road barefoot. The prints started on one side, crossed the gravel, then disappeared into the bush. Jake shrugged. "Probably from the last party." "Maybe," Ellie said. She kept looking at them. "I just think it's weird." "Why?" "They're really clear." Sam looked down. So? She frowned. "It hasn't rained for weeks." Nobody had an answer. Jake eventually clapped his hands. "Come on. We're nearly there." As we started walking again, I glanced back at the footprints. They disappeared into the darkness between the trees. For some reason, I found myself trying to imagine who'd made them. A kid, someone drunk, someone cutting through the bush. The more I thought about it, the less I liked any of those answers. Connor broke the silence. "I reckon if anyone's out here, they're probably trying to avoid us." Jake laughed. "Can't blame them." Brooke smiled. "Especially after hearing you sing." Connor pretended to look offended. "I have an incredible voice." "You absolutely do not." Even Mia laughed. The mood lifted again, only briefly. About another 5 minutes passed before Jake slowed down. Not enough for anyone to notice immediately. Just enough that the rest of us almost walked into him. "What?" Connor asked. Jake didn't answer straight away. Instead, he looked down the road, then toward the trees. "You hear that?" Everyone stopped. The silence settled around us. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. At first, I couldn't hear anything. Then, somewhere ahead, a branch cracked, Not loud, not close, just one sharp snap. Connor immediately shone his torch into the trees. The beam swept across trunks and low branches. Nothing. Sam shrugged. Kangaroo. Probably, Jake agreed. Nobody argued. It was the most sensible explanation. We started walking again, only this time. Nobody went back to talking. After a minute or so, Brooke quietly moved closer to Mia. Connor kept his torch on. Jake no longer walked quite so confidently, and without anyone saying a word. The space between all 7 of us became noticeably smaller. I don't know why. Looking back, I don't think any of us realized we were doing it. We just stopped leaving gaps. The first sign that we were close wasn't the farmhouse. It was the music. Faint at first, just enough to carry through the trees whenever the wind changed direction. Connor let out a breath. Finally, Jake smiled. Told you we were nearly there. The mood shifted almost instantly. People started talking again. Brooke joked about how she'd survived the walk without ruining her shoes. Even Sam laughed. It was strange how quickly everything felt normal again. Almost too quickly. A few minutes later, the trees opened up. The old farmhouse sat in the middle of an overgrown paddock. Cars were parked everywhere. Someone had built a huge bonfire. Music blasted from portable speakers. People were already dancing. Whatever tension we'd carried through the bush disappeared. Or at least, that's what we told ourselves. The party itself wasn't memorable. Looking back, I couldn't tell you what songs were playing, who was drinking what, or even half the people who were there. I remember conversations, laughing, someone trying to climb onto the roof before everyone yelled at him to get down. The sort of stupid things that happen at every teenage party. Nothing felt unusual. Not anymore. Around midnight, Mia found me sitting alone on the front steps. "You've gone quiet." "Tired," she nodded. For a while, we just watched the bonfire. Eventually, she spoke again. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "On the walk here," she hesitated. "Did you ever think there was someone behind us?" I looked at her. "What do you mean?" "I don't know." She stared out toward the dark tree line. "I just kept feeling like..." She stopped herself, then laughed. "Forget it." "No," I said. "What?" She shook her head. "It sounds stupid." I didn't tell her, because I'd been thinking exactly the same thing. We left not long after midnight. Some people had organized lifts. The 7 of us decided to walk back together. The road looked different somehow. Maybe because we were tired. Maybe because the firelight disappeared behind us so quickly. Nobody really spoke. The bush had gone quiet again. About halfway home, Jake suddenly stopped. Not dramatically, just stopped. Connor nearly walked into him. "What?" Jake didn't answer. Instead, he looked over his shoulder, for longer than felt comfortable. "What is it?" Brooke asked. Jake frowned. "I thought..." He shook his head. "Nothing." We waited. "What?" "I thought someone was standing back there." Connor lifted his phone. The torch cut through the darkness. Empty road, empty trees, nothing. Jake laughed awkwardly. "I'm losing it." Nobody made fun of him, because, for a split second, I thought I'd seen someone too. We reached town just before 1 in the morning. Streetlights, houses, the familiar sound of distant traffic. Everything suddenly felt ridiculous. Connor laughed. "We actually scared ourselves," Jake smiled. "Imagine telling people we got creeped out walking to a party." Brooke rolled her eyes. "I'm never walking out there again." "You say that now." "I mean it." She didn't. A month later, she went back. By the following afternoon, the whole night had already become another story we'd tell each other. At school, people asked how the party was. Someone joked that Blackwood Ridge was haunted. Connor laughed louder than anyone. Life carried on. Until Brooke sent a message to our group chat. No words, just a photo. Someone had taken a picture of us while we were walking to the farmhouse, from behind. You could see all 7 of us, Jake leading, Connor beside him, me and Mia, Ellie, Sam, Brooke at the back. The moon lit the gravel road just enough to make everyone recognizable. Connor replied first. "Who took this? Nobody knew." Brooke said she'd found it in her camera roll that morning. "I don't remember taking it."
Jake assumed someone had borrowed her phone, reasonable enough, until Ellie asked another question, one nobody answered. If this was taken from behind us, who was holding the camera? For a while, that became the mystery. We all blamed each other. Nobody admitted it. Eventually, we stopped talking about it altogether. It wasn't until nearly a year later that we noticed something else, completely by accident. Jake had come over one afternoon, for reasons I can't even remember. We ended up looking through old photos on my laptop. He stopped on that one, the photo from Blackwood Ridge. He stared at it for a long time, then quietly asked, "Where's Sam?" I laughed. "What are you talking about?" He pointed. "Count us." I did. Jake, Connor, me, Mia, Ellie, Brooke, 6. I counted again. Still 6. Sam wasn't in the photograph. Not hidden, not blocked, just missing. Except, we both remembered him walking with us. He was in every conversation we talked about. He was at the party. He walked home with us. He'd even joked about the haunted stories. Neither of us could explain it. The next day, I called Connor, without telling him why. I asked him to name everyone who'd been there that night. He listed 6 names, mine included. Sam wasn't one of them. Neither was Brooke. When I asked about Brooke, he sounded confused. "What Brooke?" I haven't looked at that photograph in years. I don't know whether it's changed again. And honestly, I don't want to know. Because every now and then, usually when I'm driving home late at night, I'll remember that walk, the gravel, the silence, Jake joking, unless someone's tagging along. Sometimes I wonder if there really were 7 of us on that road, or whether, for one night, we accidentally made room for someone else. If you enjoyed tonight's story, thank you for listening. And remember, not every strange memory is wrong. Sometimes, it's the ones everyone agrees on that should worry you the most.
Tonight's story was sent to me by someone who asked to remain anonymous. As always, names and locations have been changed. Whether you believe it is entirely up to you. There are certain things in life that you never think to question. The road you take home every night, the shape of your own house, the sound of your own footsteps. Some things are so familiar that your brain simply accepts them. You don't stop to check, you don't stop to wonder. Because why would you? A road is a road. A house is a house, and if something has always been there, surely someone would remember. That was what I believed, until the night I found a house that didn't exist. I had driven along Hollow Creek Road hundreds of times. It was the kind of road most people avoided after dark, not because anything bad had happened there, actually, the opposite. Nothing had ever happened there. It was just a long stretch of empty road surrounded by fields and thick eucalyptus trees. No shops, no houses, no streetlights. Just darkness. The kind of darkness where your headlights feel like they are barely reaching far enough ahead. I used the road because it saved me about 15 minutes on my drive home. And after 3 years of taking the same route, I knew every part of it. I knew the sharp bend near the old wooden fence. I knew the broken telephone pole leaning slightly toward the road. I knew the empty field on the left side where nothing had grown except tall grass and weeds. There was nothing there. There had never been anything there, until that night. It was just after midnight when I first saw it. At first I thought I was tired. I had worked late, and my eyes had been staring at computer screens for most of the day. So when a warm yellow light appeared through the trees ahead, my first thought was simple. Someone must have built a house there. Maybe I just never noticed, but that didn't make sense. Not after 3 years, not after driving past that exact spot hundreds of times. I slowed the car down. The closer I got, the clearer it became. There was a house sitting beside the road, not an abandoned building, not a rundown shack. A real house. 2 stories, a wide front porch, warm lights glowing behind the windows, a chimney releasing a thin trail of smoke into the cold night air. It looked like it had been there for decades, like it belonged, and somehow, that made it even stranger. I pulled my car onto the side of the road and turned off the engine. For a moment I just sat there. The headlights illuminated the front of the house. Everything about it felt normal. Too normal. There was a small garden near the porch, a wooden fence around the property, a mailbox beside the driveway, the kind of house you would drive past and never think twice about. Except I knew this road, and I knew this house wasn't here yesterday. I checked my phone. No signal. Of course. Hollow Creek was always like that. I opened my map application anyway, expecting to see some explanation. Maybe I'd somehow taken a different road. Maybe I was further away from home than I thought, but the map loaded, and the blue dot showing my location sat exactly where I expected, on Hollow Creek Road, beside an empty field, not beside a house. I stared at the screen. Then I looked back through the windshield. The house was still there. A small feeling started building in my chest. Not fear, not yet, something else. The feeling you get when you know something is wrong, but you can't explain why. I should have driven away. Looking back, that's what I wish I had done. I wish I had started the engine, put the car into gear, and never looked back. But curiosity has a way of convincing us that we're safer than we really are. So I opened the car door and stepped outside. The air was colder than it should have been. The kind of cold that doesn't come from the weather. The kind that feels like you're standing somewhere you weren't meant to be. I walked slowly toward the house. The gravel beneath my shoes sounded unusually loud. Every step echoed through the silence. Then I noticed something. The front door was open, just slightly. Not enough to look inviting, just enough to suggest someone had opened it and was waiting for me to arrive. I stopped at the bottom of the driveway, and that's when I saw the mailbox. There was no street number, no family name, no address, just one word written across the front, my name. Ethan. I remember standing there for a long time, trying to convince myself there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe it was a coincidence, maybe someone knew me, maybe this was some kind of prank, but deep down, I already knew none of those explanations made sense, because the strangest part wasn't that there was a house on Hollow Creek Road. The strangest part was that somehow the house knew I was coming. I stood outside that house for almost a full minute before I finally moved. A full minute of staring at an open door. A full minute of telling myself I should leave. But there was something about the house that made leaving feel impossible. Not because I was trapped, not because something was forcing me to stay. It was something much worse. It felt familiar, like I had been there before. I walked up the driveway slowly. Every step felt heavier than the last. The strange thing was, the closer I got to the house, the less afraid I felt. And that should have been comforting, but it wasn't, because fear would have made sense. Fear would have been normal. Instead, I felt like I was returning somewhere I had forgotten. The front porch creaked beneath my feet. The wood looked old, but not damaged. Everything about the house seemed carefully maintained. A rocking chair sat beside the front door. A small wind chime hung from the roof. A welcome mat rested on the ground. Nothing unusual, nothing scary, and somehow that made it worse. I reached for the door. I hesitated. Then I knocked. The sound echoed through the house. I waited. Nothing. I knocked again. Still nothing. The door moved slightly, not opening, just moving. As if someone on the other side had touched it. I should have left. I know that. But instead, I pushed the door open. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Old wood, dust, and something else. Something I couldn't place. It wasn't unpleasant. Actually, it was comforting. Like walking into a house you had visited 100 times before. The hallway was dimly lit. A small lamp sat on a table near the entrance. The walls were covered with photographs, family photographs. I stepped closer. At first, I thought they were normal. A family at the beach, a birthday celebration, a Christmas morning. Just ordinary moments. Then I noticed something strange. None of the faces were clear. Not blurry, not damaged. Just impossible to focus on. Every time I looked directly at them, my eyes seemed to slide away. Like my brain refused to recognize what it was seeing. I moved further inside. The living room was exactly what I expected. A fireplace, a couch, a bookshelf, a television, a small wooden coffee table, and on that coffee table, a photograph. This one was different. The image was clear. I picked it up, and immediately felt my stomach drop. It was a photograph of the house, taken from the front yard, The same porch, the same windows, the same garden, except there was something impossible about it. Written on the back of the photograph was a date, 20 years earlier. I stared at the photo, trying to understand. The house wasn't just old, it wasn't something that had appeared overnight. According to the date, it had been there for decades. I placed the photograph back down. Then I noticed something else, a clock hanging above the fireplace. The hands weren't moving. The time was frozen. 12:17. I looked at my phone. 12:17. Exactly. A strange coincidence. That was what I told myself. Because the alternative was something I wasn't ready to consider. I walked through the rest of the house. Every room felt slightly wrong. Not obviously wrong, just enough to make me uncomfortable. The kitchen had plates sitting neatly on the table, 2 cups beside the sink, a kettle on the counter, like someone had just stepped away moments earlier. Then I reached the upstairs hallway. There were 3 doors. 2 were closed, 1 was open, and from inside, I heard something. A quiet sound, like someone moving around. I froze. Every instinct told me to leave. But before I could turn around, the sound stopped. The house became silent again, completely silent. I slowly walked toward the open door. I don't know why. Maybe because I wanted an explanation. Maybe because some part of me already knew what I would find. The room looked familiar. Too familiar. A bed against the wall, a desk near the window, a bookshelf in the corner, a small crack in the paint near the ceiling. I had seen that crack before, because I had one exactly like it. I stepped closer. My breathing became shallow. The room wasn't similar to mine. It wasn't just decorated the same way. It was my room. Same bed, same desk, same books, same old mark on the wall where I had once hit it moving furniture. Even the small scratch on the floor beside the bed was there. A scratch I remembered making years ago. I stood completely still, trying to find a logical explanation, but there wasn't one. Because this wasn't a house that looked like mine. It wasn't a house inspired by my memories. It was my bedroom, inside a house that didn't exist. Then I noticed something sitting on the desk, a notebook, old, worn, familiar. I picked it up, and when I opened the first page, I saw my handwriting. The first sentence, written inside was, "I don't know how many times I've been here." I dropped the notebook and for the first time that night, I felt real fear. Because suddenly, the question wasn't, how did this house appear? The question was, how long has it been waiting for me? I left the notebook sitting on the desk. I didn't pick it up again. I didn't want to know what else was written inside, because some part of me already understood. The house wasn't showing me something new. It was showing me something I had forgotten. I walked back downstairs as quickly as I could. I didn't run. I don't know why. Maybe because running would have meant admitting that something was chasing me. And at that point, I still wanted to believe there was a normal explanation. I reached the front door, the same door I had entered only minutes earlier. I grabbed the handle. It didn't move. I pulled harder. Nothing. The door was locked. I stepped back. My heart started beating faster. I looked around the hallway. The photographs on the walls were different now. The faces were clearer, and for the first time, I could see them. They weren't strangers. They were people I recognized, people from my life, old friends, neighbors, people I hadn't seen in years. And standing in the middle of every photograph was me. I walked closer to one picture. It showed a birthday party. I remembered the day. I remembered the house. I remembered being there. Except the memory didn't make sense, because the party had never happened at this house. It had happened at my childhood home. I looked back toward the stairs. The house was changing, not dramatically, not like something from a nightmare. It was much more subtle than that. The wallpaper was different. The furniture had moved. The hallway felt smaller, like the house wasn't becoming something else. It was becoming something I knew. Then I heard the sound again, a footstep upstairs, slow, careful, someone walking across the floor. I didn't call out. I didn't ask who was there, because deep down, I already knew. I moved toward the staircase. Every instinct told me not to, but I needed answers. I needed to know why this place existed, why it knew my name, why it knew my memories. Halfway up the stairs, I saw something sitting on the railing. A newspaper, old and yellowed. The headline caught my attention immediately. Local man missing. After house fire on Hollow Creek Road. My hands started shaking. I picked up the newspaper. The article was dated 20 years earlier. The location was the same. The road was the same. The house was the same. The article described a fire that destroyed a farmhouse. The owner was listed as Ethan Parker. I stared at the name. My name. For a moment I couldn't breathe. Then I saw the photograph beside the article. The man standing in front of the burned house, the man everyone believed had disappeared, was me. I dropped the newspaper. The hallway went completely silent. Then from upstairs, I heard my own voice, quietly saying, "Ethan?" I froze. Because the voice wasn't calling my name like it had just learned it. It sounded relieved, like it had been waiting years to say it. I ran. I don't remember reaching the front door. I don't remember unlocking it. 1 second I was inside the house. The next I was standing outside in the cold night air. The house was gone. The field was empty. The road was exactly how I remembered it. For a few minutes I just stood there, trying to convince myself that I had imagined everything. That exhaustion had finally caught up with me. Then I looked down. Something was lying on the ground near my feet. The notebook. The same notebook I had left upstairs. I didn't open it. I never will. Because I already know what it says. The last page has only one sentence. The same sentence I found written on the first page. I don't know how many times I've been here. I still drive past Hollow Creek Road sometimes. I tell myself I do it to prove the house isn't there. To remind myself that it was just a strange night, a mistake, a memory that didn't belong to me. But every time I pass that empty field, I look toward the trees, and sometimes, just for a second, I see a warm light shining through the darkness. The house isn't there, not anymore, but I've learned something. Some places don't disappear because they were never real. Sometimes they disappear because they are waiting for the right moment to return. And if you ever find yourself driving down Hollow Creek Road after midnight and you see a house where there should only be an empty field, don't stop, don't look inside, and whatever you do, don't answer if someone inside calls your name. You have been listening to Coal After Dark, where every story begins with something familiar and ends somewhere you never expected to go. If you enjoyed tonight's story, make sure to subscribe and join us for more slow burn horror, unsettling mysteries, and stories designed for the quiet hours of the night. Until next time, keep the lights on, check the doors, and remember, some places are forgotten, but some places never forget you. Good night.
If you're still listening, thank you for spending part of your night here with me. I hope these stories have helped you slow down, switch off, and disappear into another world for a little while. That has always been the idea behind Coal After Dark. Not loud horror, not constant jump scares, just quiet stories that slowly settle into your mind, the kind that make you question ordinary places, a familiar road, an empty house, a hallway you've walked through 100 times before. Sometimes the most unsettling stories aren't the ones filled with monsters. Sometimes it's the ones that almost feel possible. If you're enjoying tonight's collection and you'd like to hear more stories like these in the future, I'd love for you to subscribe. Every week another anonymous account is added to the archive. Another mystery, another place, another story waiting to be told. For now, let's continue. Our final story tonight begins with a night shift security guard and a piece of footage that was never meant to be seen. Walk through each floor, make sure the doors were locked, then return to the security room and watch the cameras until his shift ended at 6 a.m. There were 24 cameras throughout the building. They covered the entrances, stairwells, hallways, and empty offices. Most nights, they showed exactly what Daniel expected. Nothing. Just empty rooms, dark corridors, and the occasional flicker from an old light. The building did make noises, but Daniel never worried about them. Old buildings always do.
Pipes would creak, the air conditioning would turn on. The walls would shift slightly as the temperature changed. Daniel had worked night shifts before. He knew what happened when you sat alone in a quiet place for too long. Your brain started creating things that weren't there. A normal sound became footsteps. A shadow became movement. A harmless noise became something much worse. At least, that's what he believed, until his third week working at the Meridian building. It happened at exactly 3:13 in the morning. Daniel remembered the time because he was sitting at the security desk, waiting for his coffee to finish brewing. The cameras were displayed across several monitors in front of him. Usually he barely paid attention to them. There was never anything to see. But that night, one of the screens caught his eye. Camera 6, the 4th floor hallway. At first, Daniel thought the screen had glitched. The image flickered slightly. Then he noticed something, a figure, standing at the far end of the hallway. Daniel immediately assumed someone had broken into the building. It was the only explanation that made sense. He stood up, grabbed his flashlight, and checked the camera again. The figure was still there, completely motionless, facing away from the camera. Daniel picked up the security radio. Hello? Nothing. He tried again. Still nothing. So he left the security room and headed upstairs. When Daniel reached the 4th floor, everything looked normal. The hallway from the camera was exactly where it should have been. The same walls, the same doors, the same empty offices. But there was nobody there. No footsteps, no open doors, no sign that anyone had entered. Daniel searched the entire floor before returning downstairs. At that point, he started looking for a logical explanation. Maybe someone had broken in and escaped before he arrived. Maybe the camera had recorded an old clip. Maybe there was some kind of technical issue. Anything was possible. Before ending his shift, Daniel decided to rewind the footage from camera 6, and that's when he noticed something that made him uncomfortable. The figure had never walked into the hallway. It was already there, standing at the end of the corridor. The camera hadn't captured someone arriving. It had simply started recording after they appeared. Daniel watched the footage several more times, trying to find an explanation, trying to convince himself it was nothing. But every time he watched it, the same question remained. How does someone appear on a camera without ever being seen entering the building? Daniel didn't tell anyone about what he'd seen. There wasn't much point. If he'd called his supervisor and said he'd spotted someone on one of the cameras, only to admit the building was empty when he checked, he'd probably be laughed at, or worse. They'd assume he wasn't taking the job seriously. So he kept it to himself. He deleted nothing, changed nothing. He simply returned the following night and waited. By the time the clock reached 3 o'clock in the morning, Daniel found himself watching camera 6 more than any of the others. He told himself he was only trying to prove it had been a technical fault, a corrupted recording, a frozen frame, anything that made sense. At exactly 3:13 a.m., the monitor flickered, his stomach tightened. The hallway appeared exactly as it had the night before, dark, empty, silent. Then, someone walked into frame, not from a doorway, not from around a corner. They simply appeared at the far end of the corridor and began walking. Slowly, calmly, almost casually. Daniel didn't move. He stared at the screen, waiting for the figure to disappear, but instead, it kept walking. Every movement felt deliberate, never too fast, never too slow, just one steady step after another. He switched to camera 5, nothing, camera 7, nothing, then camera 8. The figure was there, walking through another hallway. Daniel frowned. That wasn't possible. To reach camera 8 from camera 6 would take at least a minute. The footage showed only a few seconds had passed. He quickly checked the timestamps. Every camera displayed the exact same time, 3:13 a.m. The figure wasn't moving through the building. It was somehow appearing wherever the next camera happened to be. Daniel rushed upstairs again. This time he searched every floor. He checked every office, every emergency stairwell, every storage room. He even unlocked maintenance cupboards that hadn't been opened in months. Nothing. The building was completely empty. When he returned to the security room, the figure had vanished. The footage ended as suddenly as it had begun. The following night, it happened again. 3:13. Camera 6, the same hallway, the same slow walk. By the end of the week, Daniel had stopped calling it a glitch. Instead, he created a folder on the security computer. He named it Camera 6 Incidents. Every recording went into that folder. Every single one started at exactly the same time. Every single one lasted just under 2 minutes. And every single recording ended before the figure reached the end of the hallway. It was almost as if, whatever it was, didn't want to be seen leaving. Daniel started noticing small details. The figure always wore dark clothing. Its posture never changed, its head remained slightly lowered, and despite watching the recordings dozens of times, he could never make out its face. The image wasn't blurry, the cameras weren't faulty. It simply felt impossible to focus on, like his eyes refused to settle on it. One night, curiosity got the better of him. Daniel paused the recording. He zoomed in, frame by frame, nothing. The closer he looked, the less human the figure seemed. Not because it looked unnatural, but because it looked familiar, as though he'd seen it somewhere before, and simply couldn't remember where. That was the moment Daniel stopped thinking about intruders. Because intruders leave footprints, they force doors open, they trigger alarms, they leave evidence behind. This left nothing, except footage. And the unsettling feeling that every night at exactly 3:13, something was walking through a building that should have been completely empty.
By the beginning of his 4th week, Daniel wasn't watching the cameras because it was his job anymore. He was watching them because he needed to understand what he was seeing. Every night, the figure appeared. Every night at exactly 3:13. Never earlier, never later. Always for less than 2 minutes. Always disappearing before reaching the end of the corridor. Daniel had stopped trying to explain it. Instead, he started asking questions. The building's caretaker was an older man named Peter. He'd worked there for years, long before the offices were emptied. One quiet night, while Peter was checking equipment in the basement, Daniel casually asked if anything unusual had ever happened in the building. Peter laughed. "You're working nights, aren't you?" Daniel smiled politely. "I've just noticed a few strange things." Peter's smile faded. "You don't spend much time looking at camera 6. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. "What do you mean?" The old caretaker shrugged. "Nothing." Then he picked up his toolbox and walked away. The conversation stayed with Daniel all night. The following evening, he arrived early. Instead of sitting at the security desk, he went straight into the building's records room. Most of the filing cabinets had already been emptied. Old maintenance reports, fire inspections, renovation plans. Dust covered almost everything. Hours passed before he found a box labeled Security Archives. Inside were logbooks dating back more than a decade. Most entries were exactly what you'd expect. Doors locked, alarm checks completed, routine patrols, nothing unusual. Until one notebook stopped him. The final pages had been written by another overnight guard. His name was Michael Hayes. At first, Michael's notes sounded almost identical to Daniel's. Quiet shift, no incidents, building secure. Then, over several nights, the entries began changing. March 8th. Camera 6 showed movement, found nothing. March 9th. Checked recordings again. Same figure, same hallway. March 10th. Supervisor says it's a faulty camera. Requested replacement. March 11th. Replacement camera installed. Figure still appears. Daniel felt a chill run through him. He turned the page. March 12th. I know someone else will read this eventually. If you are, don't trust what the cameras are showing you. It wants you to keep watching. Daniel sat frozen. The handwriting changed after that. It became rushed, messy, almost difficult to read. The final entry was dated March 13th. There was no shift summary, no patrol notes, just one paragraph. Tonight the cameras stopped following it. Tonight they started following me. Daniel stared at the page for several seconds. The room suddenly felt much quieter than before. He checked the date on his phone. It wasn't March, not even close.
So why had Michael's final entry been written at exactly 3:13 a.m.? That detail hadn't been recorded in the notebook. It had been stamped automatically by the old security system. Daniel looked through the remaining paperwork. Tucked inside the back cover was a folded floor plan of the building. He unfolded it carefully across the desk. At first glance, everything looked normal. Reception, offices, meeting rooms, storage. Then he noticed something. The current security room wasn't on the original plans. Instead, there was another room, hidden behind the wall where Daniel now spent every night watching the cameras. Its label simply read, Observation Room. There was no record explaining why it had been sealed. No renovation report, no demolition order. Just a room that officially no longer existed. For the first time since taking the job, Daniel considered quitting. Not because he believed in ghosts, not because of Michael's notebook, but because every answer he found only seemed to create another question. And somewhere deep down, he had the growing feeling that whoever Michael Hayes had been writing to had finally found its next reader. Daniel didn't sleep much that day. Every time he closed his eyes, he pictured Michael Hayes' final journal entry. Tonight, the cameras stopped following it. Tonight, they started following me. He told himself he wasn't afraid. He was curious. There had to be an explanation. There always was. That evening, he arrived almost an hour early. He checked every entrance, locked every fire exit, walked every floor. He even placed small strips of masking tape across several doors. If anyone entered the building, the tape would tear. If anyone opened a door, he'd know. By midnight, everything was secure. The building was empty, just as it always had been. Daniel made himself another coffee and sat in front of the monitors. The minutes crawled by, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. His eyes barely left camera 6. At exactly 3:13 a.m., the screen flickered, once, twice. Then the hallway appeared, empty. Daniel waited. Nothing happened. 10 seconds passed, then 20. For the first time in weeks, the figure didn't appear. Daniel let out a slow breath. He actually laughed to himself. Maybe that was it. Maybe whatever had caused the recordings had finally stopped. Maybe he'd built the whole thing into something much bigger than it really was. He reached for his coffee. Then every monitor in the security room went black. Not off, just black. The cameras hadn't lost power. The timestamp was still counting. 3:13:41, 3:13:42, 3:13:43. Then, every screen returned at once. Every camera in the building was displaying the exact same image. Camera 6, the 4th floor hallway. Daniel slowly stood. 24 monitors, one hallway, the same view, the same silence. Then, someone stepped into frame. The figure wasn't walking this time. It simply stood there, perfectly still, facing the camera. Daniel leaned closer. For the first time, it lifted its head. He still couldn't make out a face. The image wasn't blurred. It was almost as if the camera refused to focus on it. Then something changed. The figure raised one arm, slowly, deliberately, and pointed. Not at the camera, past it, as if it were pointing at someone standing behind the lens. Daniel felt every hair on the back of his neck stand up, because he suddenly remembered something. Camera 6 wasn't mounted at the end of the hallway. It was mounted above the entrance, looking back toward the corridor. Whatever the figure was pointing at would be standing directly beneath the camera. Without thinking, Daniel grabbed his flashlight and ran upstairs. The 4th floor was silent. His footsteps echoed through the empty offices. He reached the hallway. From camera 6, nothing. No figure, no movement, no sound. Just the long corridor disappearing into darkness. Then he noticed something, a faint light spilling across the floor, coming from the wall at the very end of the hallway. The wall where the original floor plans had marked Observation Room. The doorway was open. It hadn't been opened before. Daniel was certain of that. Dust covered the floor around it, except for a single trail of fresh footprints leading inside. He followed them. One careful step at a time, his flashlight swept across the room, an old wooden desk, broken computer monitors, rotting filing cabinets, a security chair facing a wall of dark screens. The room smelled stale, like the air hadn't moved in years. Then his flashlight landed on the desk. There was a VHS tape, fresh, clean, as though someone had placed it there only moments earlier. A handwritten label was stuck to the front. It contained just one word, footage, and underneath, written in the same hurried handwriting Daniel had seen in Michael Hayes' journal, were 4 words that made his blood run cold. Watch the last minute. Daniel stood motionless, staring at the VHS tape in his hands. For several seconds, he considered leaving it where it was, walking away, pretending he'd never found the observation room, but curiosity had carried him this far. He needed to know what was on it. Back in the security office, Daniel found an old VHS player tucked away beneath one of the storage cabinets. It was covered in dust. Surprisingly, it still worked. He slid the tape inside. The screen filled with static. A loud crackle echoed through the room. Then, the picture appeared. The timestamp in the corner read, March 13th, 12 years earlier. The camera overlooked the old observation room. Daniel immediately recognized it. The desk, the monitors, the chair. Everything was exactly as he'd just found it. For nearly a minute, nothing happened. The room sat empty, silent. Then the door opened. Someone walked inside. Daniel leaned closer to the screen. The person crossed the room, sat down at the desk, and began watching the security monitors. His mouth went dry. The man on the tape was him. Not someone who looked similar, not someone wearing the same clothes. It was Daniel. The same face, the same jacket, the same watch on his left wrist, even the small scar above his eyebrow. Every detail was identical. Daniel froze. He couldn't breathe. The timestamp clearly read 12 years before he'd ever set foot inside the Meridian building. Then the man on the tape slowly looked up. Not at the monitors, not around the room, straight into the camera, as if he knew someone would eventually be watching. For several long seconds, he didn't move. Then, without breaking eye contact, he picked up a pen, pulled a notebook toward him, and began writing. Daniel's heart sank, because he recognized the notebook. It was Michael Hayes' journal, the same journal he'd found in the archive room. The man on the tape finished writing, closed the notebook, then looked directly into the camera one last time. His lips moved. There was no audio. But Daniel knew exactly what he'd said. Don't keep watching. The tape ended. Static returned. The room was silent. Daniel never watched the tape again. The following morning, he handed it to his supervisor along with his resignation. He tried to explain everything. The cameras, the journal, the observation room, the recording. His supervisor listened patiently, then placed the tape into another player. They watched it together. This time, there was nothing, just static, from beginning to end. The supervisor smiled politely and suggested Daniel take a few days off. The observation room was searched later that afternoon. By then, it had disappeared. The wall at the end of the hallway was solid concrete. There was no doorway, no room, no desk, no monitors, no VHS player, and no sign that it had ever existed. 3 weeks later, the Meridian building was demolished. Daniel watched from across the street as the final wall collapsed into a cloud of dust. He told himself it was over, that whatever had happened inside that building had been buried with it. But even now, years later, he still avoids looking at security cameras. If he walks into a supermarket, he looks away from the monitors. If he enters a shopping center, he keeps his head down, because sometimes, just for a split second, he catches himself wondering, what if the camera isn't showing me where I am? What if it's showing me somewhere I haven't been yet? I still don't know who was walking through that building that night, and after everything I saw, I'm not sure I ever want to know. You've been listening to Coal After Dark. If you enjoyed tonight's story and you'd like to hear more slow burn horror, unsettling mysteries and anonymous encounters designed for the quiet hours of the night, consider subscribing. Until next time, check the locks, turn off the lights, and if you ever find yourself somewhere that feels slightly wrong, trust your instincts, sleep well. And that brings us to the end of tonight's collection. If you've stayed with me all the way through, thank you. I know there are countless ways to spend an hour, and it means a lot that you've chosen to spend part of yours here. My hope is that these stories gave you a chance to slow down for a while. Maybe they helped you relax, maybe they gave you something to think about, or maybe, the next time you find yourself walking down an empty hallway or passing an old building late at night, you'll remember one of tonight's stories. If you enjoyed this collection, there are plenty more on the way. New stories arrive every week, each inspired by the same idea, that the most unsettling mysteries are often hidden in the most ordinary places. Until next time, thank you for listening. Check the locks, turn off the lights, and if you ever find yourself somewhere that feels slightly wrong, trust your instincts. Sleep well. I'll see you again after dark.